Hey everybody, this is Geronimo from the Beyond Taboo Podcast, and I'm here joined with today's guest, Kevin Anthony. How you're doing?
I'm doing well.
Nice, great to see you. Thanks for being here today. Well, Kevin is a certified sexologist and sex and relationship coach. He's also the creator of the Love Lab podcast. Uh, a podcast that has covered many topics, which I also really recommend. We'll add the link below on the video description. There's a lot of valuable content, guys, you can certainly leverage. For how long have you been running your podcast, Kevin?
I started the Love Lab podcast in 2018, and I just recently recorded episode 373.
Wow. Quite a long run. That's impressive. So, for a start, Kevin, I was wondering if we could start our conversation with a little bit about you, about your story, about, well, why sexology?
That is a great question. People always want to know, how do you end up being a certified sexologist? I can tell you, from my point of view, my story isn't the same as a lot of people. For instance, a lot of people who go into being, certified sexologists, they started out in psychology, right? So they went to school, they got a degree in psychology, they decided they wanted to specialize in the sexuality portion of that. And so they go and they pursue certifications in that. That is not at all my story. I never had any intention of teaching any of this. I had no intention of becoming a coach. I was really just learning all of this stuff for myself. So I had a strong desire to want to be better in bed. I had a strong desire to want to have better relationships, right? I've always viewed sex and relationship as something that's really important to me. And when I was younger and, I was messing things up left and right like everybody else does, I'm like, how can I do this better? And so I spent a ton of time, years of my life, reading books, going to workshops, doing everything I could to figure out, how to be better in bed, what women want, what does it mean to really be a man? Like, what is she looking for? How do I have good relationships? And I'm very fortunate because I spent the majority of my adult life living in Southern California, where there's an abundance of this kind of stuff. So, there was a period of time here where every weekend there was a workshop. Somebody was bringing in an author of a book on sexuality or, relationships or communication workshops or whatever it is. And I went to so many of those things. And that was all just for myself. And then I started noticing that people started asking me to help them. Friends, acquaintances, even a random stranger who I've never met before just approached me out in public and started asking me questions. I'm like, you don't even know who I am. But for some reason, he was observing me with my partner at the time, and he just decided to walk up to me and start asking me questions. It was at that point that I decided, okay, I get it. I'm being called to do this. So that's what got me started.
Wow, that's an interesting story, actually. I mean, as a complete stranger approaching to you without knowing you're a sexologist, certainly sounds like a call for sure. So how was that? I mean, I'm sure you had a sort of, when you mentioned this urge to learn or to be better in bed, I'm sure you encountered something that we all encounter, which is probably a huge lack of materials to learn from. Also, probably the incorrect sources women usually encounter. So how was that process of probably dropping old conceptions or traditional perspective from what you were already carrying as a man when you started your formation, for sure?
Well, I'm a bit older than you are, I'm pretty sure. And I can tell you,
the problem remains. That's one thing for sure.
Well, it does remain, but just think about how much more difficult it was when I was your age. I mean, when I was younger in my 20s, we didn't have internet. I mean,
Yeah.
like,
Oh, that certainly makes a point.
right? So, where did you learn any of this stuff? And mostly you didn't. I mean, yeah, you would get tips from maybe if you had some friends you could talk to about it or, older siblings. But mostly it
That
was just
uncle,
yeah,
that uncle.
the crazy uncle, I'm that guy now. But a lot of it was really just trial and error because you didn't have access to resources.
That's
I have a ton of books here behind me, like just rows of books here on sexuality. None of these existed when I was younger, right?
Hmm.
So it was a lot of just trial and error, and I was very fortunate that some of my early girlfriends when I was younger were up for the challenge of experimenting. Hey, what would happen if we tried it like this? How would it be if we did this? And that's often how I learned. Now it was much when I was much older, more in my 30s that I started having access to more things. The internet was a thing at that point. There was a lot more options, but it is still tricky because, as you said, the problem still persists because there's a ton of misinformation out there. So now the problem is different. Before, we didn't really have access to information in general.
That's interesting.
Now the challenge is we've got access to so much information, and so much of it is just bad information. And it's really difficult for somebody starting out to figure out what's right, what's true, and what's not.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Internet has certainly brought great things for, well, when it comes to learning, but at the same time, like you said, there's a lot of contradictory information or just plain wrong information or incorrect information. So from what you've seen so far, what are like the usual, I mean, are you seeing a pattern when it comes to what men think about sex? Like, do you see a usual pattern, even if that's throughout your story or from what you get to hear on your consultations with clients? Like, what are like the most returning or usual issues you get to identify when it comes to men and sexuality?
When it comes to men and sexuality, the biggest issues that I see as far as, clients coming to me and wanting to work with me are things like, my partner doesn't want sex. How can I get her to want more sex? That's a big one. Unfortunately, erectile dysfunction is really big now, whereas we used to see that only in, men like 50 and above. Now we're seeing it 40s, 30s, and even 20s. There's
I get to hear a lot of these cases of guys in their early 20s, popping pills like caramels.
Yeah, and there's absolutely no reason why a healthy young man in his 20s should be experiencing erectile dysfunction. That could be a whole conversation in and of itself as to why that is, but that's definitely one of the big things that I've seen change. So that's another one. Another one is performance issues. A lot of men are starting to sort of wake up and realize that their skills in the bedroom aren't cutting it anymore. Like, women are expecting a whole lot more than they used to. And so they're wanting to catch up. I would say those are probably
the majors,
the three biggest ones.
You got me thinking, though, for sure, the whole pills in early 20s it could be a whole separate topic. I guess there might be like something that crosses or connects many of these problems, which might be the whole issue around performance or what we think as performance. So I'd love you could tell us a little bit about what you think is the issue with men approaching sexuality with that chip in their heads.
So regarding performance, so that depends on which age group of men we're talking about, right?
Okay, that's interesting. I'd love to hear about those differences.
Yeah, so when it comes to older men, let's say like 40 plus. In that age group, the performance issues really revolve around, is their physical body working? Can they get an erection, right? Are they going to be able to get one when they need one, right? Will they be able to maintain it? And then, of course, lasting long enough is pretty much across all age ranges is something that men worry about. So when it comes to performance with older men, they're generally stressed out about, am I going to be able to get an erection when, we get into the bedroom? And if I do, will it last long enough for me to actually please her? And will I be able to not come so quickly? Like, those are kind of the main performance issues that older men are dealing with. Younger men, however, have those problems as well, but other problems, which is that one of the things we're seeing is that the younger generations are having a lot less sex, and they're starting sex a lot later, right? So, I'm considered a Gen Xer, so I was born in the 70s. And, for our generation, like, the only thing we could think about as we were starting to grow up and mature is, how do we get laid? Like, how do we find some women and how do we get laid? It was all of our energy went into that. Granted, we didn't really have video games and we didn't really have internet and all of that. So, we have 5 channels on the TV. So what else was there to do? Hang out with your friends and try to get women, right? Like, that's what we did.
For sure.
But with the younger generations today, that's just not the case. We're seeing that they are staying at home a lot longer, living at home a lot longer. They are dating a lot less. Then we have things like COVID that came in that just completely killed all of that interaction and interpersonal connection and communication, right? And they were no longer in school for periods of time. So all of these things have had a really big effect on younger males. What I'm hearing a lot, I see it in my YouTube comments, I see it in emails that I get, are young men, they might be in their 20s, sometimes even their 30s, and they're coming to me and they're saying, I have no experience, or I'm even still a virgin, or I've had, very like 1 or 2 girlfriends, and I just met somebody new, and I don't know what to do, and I'm afraid she's going to think I'm terrible. So there's that whole subset in the younger generations of the 20-somethings and 30-somethings. Yes, they are struggling with erectile dysfunction also, which, we mentioned earlier, which really shouldn't be happening, but is. They definitely struggle with lasting long enough, right? Being able to control their ejaculation. And then they have the fact that, due to all these factors I mentioned, they basically have no experience.
Well, that's certainly interesting. I get the same feeling. That's a topic, something I usually discuss with my friends. How, from my perspective, I'd love to hear more about what you think. I really feel that technology is really changing a lot how we as humans relate between each other. Not just plain normal interactions, but definitely sexually, it's changing a lot. COVID for sure was a thing that really pushed that change forward. And I'm a little bit scared of what comes next, to be honest, because you get to see these cases. This is something I usually talk about with my friends, how AI is also changing a lot the idea of companionship, in a sense, which also makes us wonder about our needs and the nature of our needs, and if it's just works with putting a machine, that fulfill that emotional need, in a sense. So what do you think about this major shift from the experience you had when you were just a kid, and how things are changing so rapidly today?
Yeah, that is another big topic to tackle, because there's multiple layers of how the technology is really affecting our ability to date, to meet people, to have our needs met. So, starting at, sort of the dating level, obviously online dating is a big thing that didn't exist when I was younger. So the challenges that I see these days are, we have access to so many more people through these, dating apps and sites, but yet people are finding it harder and harder to find somebody. This is something I hear repeatedly from clients, from personal friends. They're like, I've swiped until there's nothing left to swipe, right? Or I've gone on a zillion dates and none of them have turned into anything and I don't know what to do. It's something I hear a lot. And so it's an interesting example of like, here's a technology that's come in that really changed the landscape of dating. And yet it's not having the positive impact necessarily that we were hoping it would. So when I have clients or friends that come to me and they talk about that and they're like, I've been on 5 different dating sites. I've exhausted all the possibilities. I get a ton of people reaching out to me, especially the women will say this. I get a ton of people, guys reaching out to me, but they're all just looking for sex basically. And they're just frustrated and tired. And so I say, do you remember, if they're old enough anyway, I say, do you remember how we used to do it in the old days? We used to actually go out and interact with people. We would go do things. We would meet people. We would go to a friend's party and meet somebody, right? Nowadays, everybody just stays at home and they just, swipe.
Yeah.
So that's one way that technology is affecting things. When people are in relationships, we see technology getting in the way of them connecting. Too much time sitting there scrolling their phones, playing computer games, watching the 8,000 channels you have access to on your cable and through your internet. And so people aren't interacting together as much. And I hear this from couples a lot. It's just like, we barely connect. Like, yeah, you're working all day. I'm working all day. Then when we're together, we're just sitting here with our faces buried in our phones, right? So that's yet another way technology is having a sort of negative impact on relationships and sexuality. People are saying, we're not having as much sex because at night we get into bed and we're just on our phones rather than talking, touching, cuddling, doing that sort of thing. You also brought in the idea of AI. And when I'm done with the AI part, if you want, I'd be happy to talk about some of the positives of technology, because there are some positives to the technology coming in as well. I'd love
to hear more about that. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about it.
But on the negative side, now we've got this idea of AI. And here's something I'm seeing people do a lot. They're using AI to write all of their responses, right? So they're dating. And they're primarily communicating via text messages. And what are they doing? They're going to ChatGPT and they're saying, he said this, what do I say? And then they're copying and pasting that, right? And probably the person on the other side is doing the same thing. So basically we have AI talking to AI instead of human talking to human, right?
we could just put our phones in front of each other and let them talk and see what happens,
Right? The other thing that people are doing is they're taking, say, like a screenshot, or they're copying a chat that they had back and forth with somebody, and they're going into AI and they're saying, tell me what this person is thinking, or tell me what they're really trying to say. And they're asking AI for interpretations of what their partner means or is trying to say. And, some people have shared their AI responses with me, and I read over them and I'm like, they're actually not as bad as I expected them to be, but they're absolutely lacking understanding. So all you're getting when you do that is, it's like if you wanted to interpret a dream and you picked up a dream interpretation book. The dream interpretation book is going to tell you that thing generally means this for most people. Yeah. Right. And that's what they're getting with these interpretations. Well, it probably, they probably mean this. And of course, AI won't word it that way. They'll say, well, they mean this and this is what they're doing. But it's very sort of vague in general. And it's like, that could be it, but it might not be it. And then one last thing with AI, because you brought it up. And that is this idea now that people are using AI as their partner, as their companion.
Yeah.
Now,
that's what I was thinking when I initially shared the thought. I wasn't expecting you bringing this other thing about the chats, which is quite interesting, I must say. But please go ahead.
Well, right now they're primarily using it in an app form. It's like it was after my generation, but they had those little electronic, they're basically like babies. I don't remember what they were called. And like,
Tamagotchi.
yes, exactly. And you had to do something every day, and it was basically trying to teach you. It's kind of like that, but your partner is on your app now, your AI app. And I get the fact that people will get some sort of interaction. So if you don't have somebody to talk to, at least you've got something to interact with.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's absolutely missing the entire human component, right? And then the next step, which is already here, by the way, it's here. It's just not as popular yet, but it will be, which is full on robots. You will have you could have a robot girlfriend or boyfriend that looks real, that speaks to you, that you can even have sex with. They exist already.
Yeah.
But again, there is an intangible quality to being human that cannot be replicated with apps or even robots. And you're missing that in all these interactions. And so you might feel some areas being fulfilled, but you're going to absolutely feel lacking in others.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I find this very interesting in a sense. The fact that we actually need something like separated from us to be able to fulfill or just live something which is just part of our nature in a sense, like, I mean, we are social animals, if you will, and the fact that we are creating things that aren't just plainly human to be able to fulfill our own nature, I think really talks about how, well, in a sense, I'm sorry maybe to take it there, that it's just a matter of capitalism intersecting the way we'll live in the sense of creating products. We are creating products when there's actually not necessarily a need for that. Like we create problems to sell later a solution in a sense, or at least that's what I think.
Yeah, well, regardless of what system, economic system or political system you're talking about, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. So capitalism has some really amazing advantages, but it also does have some disadvantages. And you're right, like there are often profit motives that are driving certain things to be created that are, like you said, a solution seeking a problem, right? But the answer to that is really simple, because in an actual capitalist system, if there's no demand for it, it goes away. So in other words, if the marketplace is trying to push AI robots as our partners, right? All we have to do as consumers is not buy them. Just don't want it. And if we don't buy it, they're not going to make it because they're going to lose tons of money. And we've seen that in the marketplace over and over again. So, but that requires us as humans to take responsibility and to stand up for the things that we believe in. And that sometimes is hard for people to do. They just kind of go with the latest trend rather than saying, you know what? I don't think this is really that good for us, and I'm not going to partake.
That's true. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the other day I was talking with some friends when the latest release of Grok AI was released. You probably heard of Annie, this AI companion that Grok released, and I've talked about this anecdote before, but I find it very interesting, especially in countries like Japan, where there's this major issue with interaction, social interaction. And when Annie or that part of Grok was first released, like all servers fall down in Japan, everyone wanted to have their own AI girlfriend, and it's huge. I'm a little bit scared, but like you just said, it's just one of those moments where, I mean, if we are against something, like express our opinion or just don't take part of it, But it's a major shift for sure. That's for sure.
Yeah, it is. And like I said, well, so in the Japanese culture, they have a very unique culture, and there are some reasons why they tend to, move towards things like that. For instance, in Japanese culture, it's very normal for them to actually live in their workplace housing, right? And so they'll work for a company, the company provides the housing, they work extremely long hours. So they're basically, in that environment their entire lives. And so they don't have a lot of time or space for things like going out and dating and that sort of thing. Sure. So there's some cultural differences there that make that maybe a little bit more normal for their culture. But technology isn't going away in any culture. In fact, it's going to keep coming at us. And so we need to figure out, how do we integrate it in a way that actually works for us, in a way that doesn't cause more problems? Technology should be there to help us, not to create new problems.
That's true. I like what you're saying. And identifying this major shift, the benefits and disadvantages that it's bringing, what would be your advice to guys, being in this situation where they just find themselves without the experience, or just dominated by this set of thoughts and social demands that sometimes, the idea of performance builds, in our heads?
Yeah, I mean, if the issue is they don't have a lot of experience, the reality is there's only one way to get experience, right? The only way to get experience is to go out there, date, spend time, with the opposite sex, and start to learn. So you can do that. You don't have to stay behind your phone or your computer screen or sit at home. Like, actually go out there and interact with other human beings. Have relationships, do your best, right? You will make mistakes, and that's okay. And when it comes to lack of experience, keep in mind, you're not the only one that has a lack of experience. Both sides are dealing with similar issues. Now, granted, for a woman, the performance isn't quite as big a deal. She doesn't have to achieve an erection. She doesn't have to try to control an ejaculation. She can pretty much fake it with some lubrication and a few deep breaths and relaxation. It's not going to make it great for her, but she can at least get through it if she wants to. But the fact is, she probably doesn't have a lot of experience either. And so what I recommend is, guys, they always have this problem where it's like, I can't admit to them that I don't have experience. Let me just tell you right now. First of all, she'll probably be relieved that you tell her that. And second of all, you guys get to work together on that. She would rather have you say, you know what? I haven't had a lot of experience with women. And, I'm really enjoying the interaction that we're having, and I want to be sexual with you. I'm just wondering, can we take it slow, right? Can we start off slowly? Can we, experiment with a few things and just have that conversation? She'll probably be so relieved. The funny thing is, and this is especially true when you're younger, right? When you're younger as a man and a woman asks you how many women you've slept with, you always want to embellish that number a little bit, because you think that means, look at me, I'm experienced, and she's going to want an experienced man. But the reality is that's not actually what she's hoping for. She does not want to hear a high number from you. She'd actually prefer that you have a lower number, because she wants to know that you're not just out there trying to have sex with her and then you're going to leave. If you're like, I've had sex with 20 women, and you're 20 years old or 22 years old, what does that tell her? That tells her that all you want is sex, and as soon as you get it, you're gone. So she doesn't want to hear that anyway. So just be honest. It's okay if you don't have a lot of experience. She will probably be perfectly fine with that. And my experience with women is, that in general, they are very forgiving when it comes to that sort of thing, as long as you communicate with them. If you say, hey, you know what? I have a little bit of a challenge, lasting long enough, but I'm working on it. Here's how we can work together. She'd be like, okay. But if you're just showing up and you're not saying anything about it, you're not communicating about it, you're not acknowledging there's a problem, but in 5 minutes or less, you're ejaculating and you're out and you're just like not even acknowledging it, that's where the problem, she's going to be like, what the F?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's very important when you give the chance for the space to actually feel safe, and that's only doable or possible through communication.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, communication is the foundation not only of great sex, but also a great and healthy relationship. And when it comes to sex, a lot of times people don't think of that as being a skill they should learn. They're like, okay, yeah, I know I need to strengthen my pelvic floor muscles and I need to learn how to last longer and I need to learn these moves and, I need to learn how to use my hands or whatever. But they don't think about communication, which is where it all starts.
Yeah, that's true. And that's usually the most unexpected, but at the same time, basic lesson you can get, and like you just said, I mean, we usually think that we have to have this arsenal of techniques and tricks in order to impress, when pretty much, those can definitely work for sure, but at the same time, it's all a matter of finding that unique thing, or just through just listening the other and learning what they like in the space and instant that arises from that interaction.
Yes, and you bring up a good point, which is, if we're giving advice to men here, we need men to understand that, what a woman wants is going to change from, one session to another and potentially even one moment to another, right? So one of the big things, when it comes to teaching what I call sexual mastery. So, we can work on, how to get an erection and maintain it. We can work on how to last longer. Those are like what I call sort of foundational skills. Those are the basic things that you need to master. Can you get it up and can you maintain it? Can you last long enough? But after that, there's a whole other range of skills that we would call sexual mastery. And in that...
How you conceptualize these skills.
Thank you. So when it comes to sexual mastery, a big portion of that is what we would call presence, right? So presence with, her being able to feel you, being really present with her, but also your ability to be paying attention to her and where she's at and what she's needing in that moment, because it does fluctuate and change that often. And unfortunately, a lot of men, they get into this space where they're like, I just want to figure out, the steps. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And
objective.
Right. And every time we have sex, I start at step 1 and then I work my way through to step 4. But that's just not how it works with her. Step 1 works today, but tomorrow maybe it doesn't work, right? And you got to do something different for step 1. But you won't know that unless you're really paying attention to her and also having good conversations with her about where she's at and what she's needing in that moment, right? So those are more mastery level skills.
No, that's true. That's true. It's a huge part. It's a huge part. The least covered. Usually, I feel. I feel like there's a major offer of people teaching skills. Like you get to see a huge spectrum of influences with apps and all. Teaching you different techniques. But usually, this is a bit of the whole sexual knowledge or the sexual mastery, like you said, that I feel it's not enough covered, or I mean, and it's sometimes hard in a sense because it usually goes against a way we, or the majority of us men, learn to be a specific way of like being a man, and usually touches things that go against that concept of being a man, such as showing a bit of vulnerability or just listening and connecting, and that very, let's say, sensitive part of what relating entails.
Yeah, I did a show not too long ago where I was reading the results of a rather long survey. I actually did a couple of shows where I was reading basically statistics. They went out and they surveyed people, asking them all kinds of questions around sex and relationships. The reason I bring that up is because in one of those surveys, when they were asking women basically what is the most important trait that they were looking for in a man, presence was the number one thing on the list, right? So when you're talking about, sex and in the bedroom and all the skills that you could possibly have, which one does she want the most from you as a man? She wants your presence, first and foremost. So, the people who are only teaching the skills, okay, the skills are great, but it's not going to get you to mastery level. It's not going to get you to, a woman who's begging you for more sex. It's not going to get you to a woman who would do anything for you and never leave you because you're amazing. It's going to get her to go, yeah, he's good in bed, but yada, 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 right? So, so the skills are only one small part.
Yeah, that's true. And that's, I guess, how easily some of these ideas get associated with the idea of performance, which I guess, it's all right. To want to give a good impression, but sometimes it's just more easy to think in other terms, like, let's just have fun and connect and be here in the moment, and get to know each other. But it's complex, it's complex when from a very early stage we learn from these models, these stereotypes. So I really like what you're saying, and I 100% agree.
The reality is that to be, a sexual master, or what I use the term integrated masculine man to describe, what I consider to be a healthy version of masculinity today. It takes a lot of work to do that. And what I see sometimes from especially younger men is they're not used to putting in that kind of work. They're used to sort of having everything given to them, right? It's sort of the everybody gets a trophy generation, where it used to be you only got a trophy if you actually put in the work to get good at something and excel. So it does take work to become that man. And you're right. We don't have a lot of good examples. Movies and TV aren't really showing us healthy examples of what it means. So then we have to go out and try to seek what does it really mean to be, a healthy masculine. And then we got to do the work because we just haven't been taught it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But the good thing is that, well, we can count with examples like you made. The work you do, sexologists out there bringing their knowledge, bringing other types of talks. Well, this conversation itself, I guess it's all part of that change we're trying to promote, in a sense. Because I really think we need to discuss more about these topics, we need to lose the fear of talking about these topics, because, well, after all, still today, sex still feels a little bit taboo. And it should be easier, So, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, well, you're right. Unfortunately, today, sex is still considered very taboo, and it's something that a lot of people won't talk about. One of the biggest compliments I get from listeners to my podcast and my YouTube channel are, you just talk about these things. You talk about them so openly and so easily, and people will tell me that, one, they're not used to seeing anybody do that, and two, they feel like it gives them permission to then be able to talk about it. And that's what we need. We need more healthy discussions about it. Our society is full of unhealthy discussions about it, but we need more healthy discussions about it, because if we can't even talk about it, how are we going to fix the challenges that are there?
That's a great question, actually, for sure. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's usually off-putting, and when people are, I mean, you gave just the quite the opposite example, when it's encouraging to actually hear someone be so open about sex. But still, there's a little bit of these off-putting situations for some people where someone is so open that doesn't give the best reaction, But we have to change that. We have to change that.
Yeah, and it depends. It depends how somebody is being open. So, for instance, there are maybe people in, say, the swinger community that are very open about the way they talk about sex, but because their lifestyle doesn't appeal to everybody, it can sort of have that negative reaction where like, oh, they're too open about that. I don't want to go there, right? But it doesn't have to necessarily be extremes of, sexual behavior. Just somebody talking calmly and rationally from an educated perspective about what sex is and how we can do better. I think, nobody should really be having a negative reaction to that. And if they do, what it's basically showing is that they've got some sort of programming or trauma underneath the surface that's getting triggered by having a rational, calm, educated discussion about sexuality.
Yeah, or not educated at all, because I feel it's important for us to feel safe. I mean, also it's difficult for to feel safe when probably you're not around the best place to feel that way. But yeah, sometimes even populating spaces or relations with these topics is also a matter of asking the questions, to learn, or just looking for advice, so yeah, I 100% agree. Mate, I was wondering if I could just shoot you one last question to wrap up this conversation. I feel, well, we talked about a very complex panorama when it comes to technology. You mentioned already a couple of tips or steps forward for guys, looking to feel better about their sex lives. But I hear more and more the lasting longer issue. And I saw you covered recently in an episode like masturbation techniques. So I was wondering if you could briefly recommend, like, as a takeaway for guys watching us and listening us, something they can take as homework to try, addressing the issue. What would that be?
Yes, I have a couple of tips for them. The first thing is this: most men masturbate in a way that actually trains their body to ejaculate too quickly. So let's think about how the average person masturbates today. They generally use some form of porn. They'll spend about 10 or 15 minutes cruising the porn, trying to find the clip that they want to watch that'll work for them in that moment. And then once they find it, boom, they're off to the races. And in three minutes, maybe 5 tops, they ejaculate and they're out, right? The problem is, though, is that is literally training your body to ejaculate that quickly. So the porn is overly stimulating, right? And then, of course, you're conditioning your body that you build that arousal very, very quickly. And then you just dump it all out quickly in an ejaculation. So that even starts earlier. It even starts before porn. If you think about it, a lot of men, when they discover their penises and they're like, ooh, this kind of feels good and I'm going to masturbate, they're generally pretty young. So what are they doing? they're trying not to get caught because they've been told it's wrong. So they're like
That's true.
in the bathroom, the only place where nobody will actually walk in on them, but they can only stay in the bathroom for so long or parents are going to know something's up, right? So they're just trying to hurry up with it. Same thing, in their bedroom, potentially somebody could walk in at any moment, right? So it's kind of starts there, and then it moves into, when they're older, the use of porn, and all of those things are teaching them basically what not to do, how to ejaculate quickly. So the advice then becomes to change that, right? So when people are really struggling with lasting long enough, the first thing I tell them is, like, you're going to have to stop the porn for a while, at least, until you can retrain your body and then learn to use it responsibly. So stop that. When it comes to masturbating, take your time.
Quite a challenge.
It can be. Absolutely. When you're masturbating, slow down. Take your time. There's, of course, practices like edging, which are great, where you can bring yourself close to an orgasm and then stop before you go over. Let that energy come back down and keep taking yourself there. If you do that consistently and regularly, you'll notice it takes longer and longer to get to that point where you feel like you're going to ejaculate. So edging practices are great. You have to change your mindset around sexuality and performance all around, when it comes to masturbation and when it comes to being with a partner. It is no longer about the destination of I'm going straight towards ejaculation. It's how can I slow down? How can I enjoy the process and the journey?
Yeah, in a sense, it's less about image and more about sensation, in a sense.
Yes, and that's the thing. And this is what I tell guys all the time. I'm like, would you rather have a bunch of sensation for 3 minutes? Or would you rather have a lot more sensation spread out over like 20 or 30 or an hour or 2 hours, right?
Yeah, it's like eating your food too fast, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. You don't really get to enjoy it, right?
Yeah. Well, mate, those were great tips. That's actually a great, you could say, plan to move forward. So guys, if you have issues with this usual problem for us men, you can also watch Kevin's podcast episodes where he covers this topic. I'd love to cover this in more detail sometime. We covered a lot of topics. I certainly feel we could specify on one point if you're open to do it next time sometime. So Kevin, I appreciate your time, your expertise. Guys, don't forget to check out the Love Lab podcast, to visit Kevin's website. Don't forget to follow and drop your comments if you have any questions for Kevin. It was a pleasure, mate, really.
Well, thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I know we kind of went all over the place, but that was actually really fun. I got to talk about some things that I don't get asked very often.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I thought we could, be a little bit spontaneous along the way. So I appreciate your openness to discuss these different points. And you definitely are one of the models we need so much, mate. So I appreciate your work. Thanks.
Thank you so much.